Oh, I have too much stuff here. Hang on a sec. I'll just put that there and you can wonder about it while I'm standing here. There we go, good. It is a great pleasure to be back in Texas. I spent a summer in Houston here, and I was glad to leave at that point. Summer in Houston was a little hot, and it's wonderful to be greeted here. And honestly, you didn't have to go so far as to bring Colorado weather down here to make me feel better at home, but that was nice anyway. It's pretty chilly out here. I was kind of surprised. When I was asked to come speak here, and I said, what are you going to talk about? And I thought, well, there are a lot of different topics, and it's perfect. The president was just talking about how great of a year 2012 is going to be. And with the anecdote that he gave, if I were sitting in a meeting or a congregation and somebody said, everybody here is going to die one day, my question would be, what day? And there are people who think they know that day. These people are wrong. And it turns out that all of the plans that TJC has here, you're going to have to work on them because 2012 is going to be a big year, and you're going to get a chance to continue, and that's what I'm going to tell you about here. The original title of this talk was going to be why you need to tell your students they still have to do their homework in 2012, and I thought that was too long, so I decided to change it to 2012, the year nothing happened. That's a little disingenuous. People always talk to me and ask, is the world going to end in 2012? And I'm a scientist. The honest answer is, well, maybe. I don't know. I don't think so. And if it is, it's certainly not for the reasons that these people are claiming. I don't know how many of you heard about this. When I talk to people about it, some people are kind of clueless about it, and other people are really totally into it. But the idea here is that the world is going to end in the year 2012. This idea has been around for a while, it turns out, but it was actually made popular fairly recently. And then the date I put up there is on purpose. Let's see, where do I point this? Up there, maybe? Or up, down, sideways, at me? Okay. The idea that 2012 is going to be the end of the world is not new. At least the idea that the end of the world is coming is not new. It's been around forever. Just going back a few years, not even to the year 2000 and Y2K and everybody panicking about that. There were all sorts of things. Where did I point this that it actually, okay, there, that actually worked. You may not remember in May 5th, 2000, there was going to be a planetary alignment that was going to wipe out the world. I wound up having to tap dance a lot about that. That was very popular on late night radio and TV shows. 3 years later was PlanetX. You may have heard of PlanetX. It was again in the radio and TV and news. People were talking about this giant planet that was going to sweep in from the outer solar system and flip the Earth over, cause earthquakes, kill 90% of the population. And you may remember that date as nothing having happened. These things come and go. A few years ago, there was asteroid TU-24. This is one of an endless stream of asteroids which are going to come and wipe out life on the planet. It turns out this one, like all these other ones, was nowhere near the Earth. A lot of people like to talk about this. If you go on YouTube and look up asteroid doomsday, and you get past the stuff by me, which is actually accurate, you'll see lots of breathless talking of asteroids that are going to destroy the Earth, and they never quite seem to do it. That's not that they can't do it. If you come to the talk I'll be giving tonight at the planetarium, you'll see that they in fact can do that, and there's something we can do to prevent it. But in the past, it's been basically 65 million years since we had any real issue with an asteroid, and that would have been from the dinosaurs. And then again, just last year there was the Judgment Day prophecies, the Doomsday prophecies of Harold Camping that didn't turn out either. These things come and go all the time. What makes 2012 special? Well, one thing that makes it special is it was a big Hollywood movie. And we know how accurate those are, so of course it must be real. How many of you here saw this movie? I am so sorry. If you liked that movie, you're wrong. No, actually, it was a huge blockbuster movie. John Cusack and Amanda Peet. I watched it. I love doomsday movies. I've seen almost all of them. This was basically 2.5 hours of John Cusack jumping in a car and barely escaping the Earth opening up beneath him. And it turns out that this movie popularized the 2012 doomsday idea, but it has nothing to do with 2012. I remember at the end of the movie thinking, what does this have to do with anything? And it turns out that this was just a big disaster movie that they were going to do. Once the 2012 idea started becoming popular, they kind of changed the name of the movie and just threw it in there. It really has nothing to do with the 2012 prophecies that you hear about, but it did a fantastic job of making them popular, including scaring a lot of people who otherwise would never have heard about this. So where did this start? Well, it turns out, when I talked about the specific date, that is coming from the Mayan calendar of all places. Now, the Mayan civilization was pretty big, and it lasted for quite some time. It was all through northern South America and Central America, and they were, for their time, pretty advanced. They had excellent architectural skills. They observed the sky. They had a fairly advanced calendar system that was actually fairly complex. They were actually one of the first civilizations to have a concept of the number 0, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know that until quite recently. I thought that was a more recent invention. It turns out they had it. Now, their calendar, they had actually 3 different calendars. They had a civil calendar, which was a lot like ours, 365 days in a year. You can't control that. In a calendar, there are going to be basic units. And 2 of the most basic units are the day, because you live through that every day. You wake up, the sun comes up, sun goes down. And there's also the year, which is how long it takes the Earth to go around the sun. And the problem is the Earth's spin, the day, and the Earth's year, the time it goes around the sun, don't really fit perfectly. There's 365 days in a year, kinda. It's really 365 days in a quarter. And that extra quarter adds up, and we have a leap year every 4 years. Except it's not exactly a quarter of a day. It's a little bit less than a quarter of a day, so that the calendar starts getting ahead, and then every 100 years, we don't have a leap day. But that still doesn't quite make it. So every 400 years, we do. It's crazy how this all works. But that's the problem with a calendar. You have to sort of be a little bit arbitrary. Well, the Mayans had a different system. Now, they had what they called a day was called a kin. And instead of a week like we had, they have 20 kins to a weenal. Now, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these correctly. My mind's a little rustic. I took French a long time ago. In fact, I am a product of a community college. I went to Northern Virginia Community College for a year and took French there. And it's my fault that I hardly remember anything of the French I learned. They didn't offer Mayan, so I'm doing my best here. But basically, their week, you can think of it, was a weenal, week weenal. It makes it easier to remember. And they had 18 of these weenals, 18 weeks to a year. And 18 times 20 is 360. 360 is a great number. It's why it pops up a lot. It's divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12. You get a lot of divisions in it, so it's a handy unit. And it's very close to how many days are in a year. You can have 360 days in a year, and then those 5 left over, you can have celebrations or whatever. And a lot of civilizations did that. You can imagine how they celebrated. I'll leave that up to you, but a lot of civilizations did this. Well, the problem is it doesn't quite line up with the year. So this particular calendar and the civil calendar didn't match, and you have to keep track of that. And then they had even higher units than a year, just like we have decades and centuries and millennia. They had what's called a tun, which is 20. Let's see if I got that right. No, the tun was actually like the year. That's 360 days. The katun is 7,200 tun. 7,200. See, this is hard. It's 20 tuns is 1 katun. And yes, that's it. Okay. And that's roughly 20 years. And then you have, finally, the baktun, or just the baktun as most people pronounce it, which is sort of a longish period of very roughly 400 years. And that was one of the bigger, this is sort of the biggest unit that they used in daily life that they would talk about. Just like we might say, in the next century, we'll be able to do something. They would have said the same thing, but they would have used the baktun. Now, you'll notice that actually, it's not on this, on the slide I have coming up. The thing is, the reason this is all here is that there's more than one baktun. Just like we have the 20th century, the 21st century, they counted their baktuns. The baktun that we're currently in, this 394-year period, ends on December 21st, 2012. That's this year. What does that mean? Nothing, okay? The walk-away point here is it doesn't mean anything. There's nothing that's going to happen at that point. There we go. Just like when you're driving your car, right? And the odometer switches over from 99,999 to 100,000. There we go. You can see that there. What happens when that happens? Well, you take it in for a checkup. You get your brakes checked. You can bring it here to the automotive department. I hear they're quite good. And and you get it checked out. And it's the same thing. You know, what happens when it's the end of the year? We just had the end of the year a week ago. What did you do? You threw away your calendar and you bought a new one, right? That's not an epic disaster. It's just something you have to deal with. So it turns out that the reason this comes up is because the Mayans, like most civilizations, have a creation myth, and they have a date that the gods created the earth, and they actually did it 3 times, and they kept messing up. I believe it was on the 3rd time that they got it right and that humans were created and everything worked out well. And the date that started was, if you try to match up their calendar with ours, was August 11th, 3114 BC. So that was quite a long time ago. That's when their calendar starts. And they do it, they measure it from right to left. So it's, that would have been at 0, let's see if I get this right, 0 Tin, 0 Winal, 0 Tun, 0 Baktun, and they started it at 13, which is a little strange. But they were sort of base 20. They used 20s a lot when they were counting instead of like we use 10. And you can match up all of the Baktuns to all of the different dates, and you see that the one that is the 13th Baktun is going to end on December 21st, 2012. Well, again, you know, what does this mean? And it doesn't mean anything. They would have celebrations when this happened, and there was a sense of renewal when this happened. It was a time of starting over again. And, you know, if that sounds familiar, it's because we do the same thing, right? There's a sense of renewal at the end of every year. We make our New Year's resolutions, and we get a sense of we get a fresh chance to start again. They did the same thing. There is no Mayan writings, there is nothing that we have seen that says anything about the end of the world. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The idea is that the gods, when they created the world this 3rd or 4th time, they got it right. So there was no need to destroy it and start over again. We're happy, we're good, we're going to keep this going. Now, when I first was looking at this, and I was thinking to myself, you know, this is a little strange. Why would you worry about the clock ticking over from the 13th to the 14th Baktun, or the 12th to the 13th, depending on how you count it? Why would you even worry about that? They're clearly base 20. That's what they keep using, all of these 20s. And we're right in the middle of a cycle. It would be like saying that you know, 1969 to 1970, when that calendar ticked over, that would be the end of the world. And, you know, it's right in the middle of the century. It doesn't make much sense. And actually, I had a lot of people tell me, it's like, did you experience disco? Do you remember the end of the world back in the 1970s? But in fact, this is in the middle of the calendar. There are several more Baktuns to go. On the other hand, it turns out that 13 was an important number to them as well. So you got to be careful if you're talking about this. It's a little bit difficult to know what's going on. But what we do know is what's not going on. And again, it's that the idea that this was some sort of doomsday, that the world was going to be destroyed. There is no evidence for this. This all started in the 1980s when a guy wrote a book about this, trying to sort of tie in end-of-the-world New Age prophecies with the Mayan civilization. There's zero connection between these two things. I'm not going to say he made it all up, but that is certainly a place to start as far as a hypothesis, because there's just no connection here. And you can go and you can read the Mayan inscriptions on their stones and everything, and there's just nothing about this. All of the Mayan scholars, who are called Mayanists, nobody agrees with this idea that in 2012 the world's going to end, or that the Mayans had any predictions about that. Not that has stopped people from talking about it. And this is a huge, huge business. Besides, you know, $100 million Hollywood movies, there are books, there are radio shows, there are movies. The History Channel is nothing but 2012 all day, all week, all the time, until, I guess, December 22nd this year, and then they'll find the next thing to talk about. But what's going on? So what are some of the claims that are being made? How is it that the world is going to end? How is this? You know, how can you destroy an entire planet? It turns out it's not that easy unless you're making stuff up, and then it's really easy. You can have a planetary alignment, for example, that can destroy the Earth. You can have PlanetX coming back, that old PlanetX from 2003. There can be a solar flare that could wipe out civilization as we know it. Or, and I love this one's my favorite, the sun could align with a black hole. And that sounds really bad. And it would be, except it isn't. So what's going on? Let me do these in order. Planetary alignment. What is a planetary alignment? Well, if you were to go outside right now and it weren't raining and the sun were down, so don't do it right now. If you were to go out this evening and it's clear and you look out and you look to the west after the sunset, you'll see Venus over here. It's very bright. It's hard to miss. If you look to the south up higher, you'll see Jupiter. Later on in the evening, Mars rises. And in fact, Uranus and Neptune are up as well. And if I show you a map of what the sky looks like, let's see if I do this right. Aha! Oh, I got to go backwards now. Thank you. If I show you a map of what the sky looks like, on December 21st, 2012, if you were to go out, this is during the day, the sun will be up, but the planets here, Saturn, Venus, Mercury, Pluto's there, if you still want to think of Pluto as a planet. Wasn't Clyde Tombaugh, was he in Texas for a while? Lowell Observatory, that's what I'm thinking, it's where he observes. So there's some connection to Texas there. Mars, Neptune, Uranus, the moon, they do appear to be in a line in the sky, but that's always true. The solar system is flat and we're in it, so we're seeing it edge on. When you go out and look at the sky, the planets are always in a line someplace. So this is not really an alignment. What they're talking about is physically lined up from the sun, the planets will be in a line. So I thought, well, what's the solar system really look like on December 21st, 2012? And it turns out, on the next slide, this is actually a map I was able to produce. And you can see here's the inner solar system. Here's the sun, Mercury and Venus. Here's the Earth. So here's the Earth here. If you look towards the sun, Mercury and Venus are sort of on the right, if you can picture that. Mars is on the left. And if we shrink that down, Jupiter is behind you, Saturn's on the right, Uranus, Neptune are on the left. I mean, the planets are scattered everywhere. This isn't a line. This is just everywhere. This is like throwing the planets up in the air and seeing where they land. Okay, this is not an alignment under any circumstances. I'm not seeing a huge number of claims about a planetary alignment, but I am hearing about it. And this is important because hearing about something is just as big of a deal to somebody who doesn't understand some of this stuff as seeing it written down in detail. Because they say, I heard the planets were going to align. It's like, no. And you can go on any solar system, any sort of website that shows you the positions of the planets, and you can show people this. I have had students ask me about this. I've had young kids ask me about this, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes, and saying, I've heard this. And what I'm trying to do here, by the way, is simply arm you with some basic facts. Your students know about this stuff, and they're going to ask you about this. So, okay, planetary alignment, not so much. Oh, the trigger on this thing's a little, I think maybe a battery. There we go. A planetary alignment is not, it's just simply not true. Okay, so what's next? What about this PlanetX thing? I keep hearing that there's this 10th planet, or possibly a 9th planet. I love this movie, actually. It's actually kind of a creepy space guy there. What is PlanetX? Well, this is an idea that's been around for a long time. At first, Pluto was PlanetX. X was just given the idea of unknown, right? So anything that's unknown, there's element X, planet X, whatever. It also means 10 in Roman numerals. So if there's a planet beyond Pluto, the 10th planet, it was called Planet X. Well, now Pluto is no longer a planet, so we have to find a 9th planet before we can find a 10th planet. Believe me, I'm just as ticked as astronomers as you guys are. I actually feel that the definition of a planet is screwy anyway. We probably shouldn't have one, and if we did, Pluto wouldn't count anyway. But I'm willing to argue that later. That's not important. The important thing is there's this idea that there is this giant planet out there, and it's floating around the solar system. It's on this big orbit, takes thousands of years to circle, and it swings by the Earth every few thousand years and causes earthquakes, and the Earth will flip over, and dogs and cats living together. It's just terrible stuff. Love quoting Ghostbusters if I can. The idea actually started in the 1950s with a guy named Emanuel Velikovsky, who wrote a series of books. He said, what if the disasters in the Bible were literally true? What if the Red Sea did part? What if mostly the plagues of the Pharaoh in Exodus, what if those actually happened? Could I find a physical reason for them? And he decided that the planets in the solar system were just bopping around. Venus and Mars were moving around the solar system. Their gravity was affecting the Earth, and all these things happened. And then that sort of died off after a few years. It got picked up by another guy who wrote a series of books. His name was Zecharia Sitchin. He found in Babylonian script that there appeared to be a 12th planet. And I keep thinking, 12? Where are we getting 12 from? And it turns out they included the sun and the moon, and if you also include Pluto and Uranus and Neptune, which ancient people didn't know about, there's a little slight technical problem there. They didn't have telescopes. But anyway, he popularized this, and then that went away. And then in 2003, it got picked up again because there was a woman who was claiming to be telepathically communicating with aliens from another star who were telling her about this 10th planet named Nibiru, which was going to come by the Earth and cause all kinds of disasters. And she gave a specific date. This is my favorite thing about doomsday people, is when they give a specific date. Because then the next day, and she said May 15th, 2003, on or about May 15th. But, that day came and went, nothing. You may remember that day as getting up, brushing your teeth, teaching, whatever. And the Earth not being destroyed, say. And so that's where this whole Planet X thing came from. Back then, when I wrote about this and when I was talking about this, I said, this will come back. This has been around, it will come back. And when somebody said, why do you think it'll come back? And I thought about it for a second. I said, you know what? The 2012 stuff coming up in a few years, this will get recycled. I was absolutely right. I hate being so smart all the time. Planet X has been seen so many times, including in NASA data. You can see it there labeled, Nibiru with a solar flare and an orbiting moon. That's actually a picture from NASA's solar solar and heliospheric observatory, which has been orbiting the sun orbiting the Earth for quite some time, and it observes the sun, and it takes tons and tons of pictures. That is simply just a planet. It's overexposed. There's an internal little loop. You get that sometimes in pictures. It's called a lens flare. That's just another bright star. Whenever they're overexposed, they get those little lines in them. That's all it is. You see, Planet X pictures you see a lot of misinterpreted data from observatories. Here's Planet X again. Turns out that's an internal reflection in the camera. It's a lens flare. I don't even know what this is. I think this is just obviously somebody photoshopping something, a little red blob into some stars. Here's some more misinterpreted data from SOHO. Here's another lens flare, but is this the real thing? Yeah, but if you just say no, you can't write a website about it, right? Oh, look, another lens flare. And another lens flare. These are all claimed to be Planet X. I went on Google, I typed in Planet X, I went to search images, I found all of these things. There are tens of thousands more just like this, just as legitimate, that are all just silly lens flares and stuff. There has been no evidence of a Planet X. And in fact, I can prove this pretty easily. When somebody asks you, well, how do you know there's no Planet X? Again, here's our solar system, right? Here's the sun. Leave off Mercury and Venus because it'd be too crowded to show them. Earth, Mars, Jupiter, there's the asteroid belt. This is roughly to scale, the orbits, not the sizes of the planets, but the orbits are roughly to scale. Jupiter is about 5 times farther from the sun than the Earth is. It's about 400 million miles, very roughly. Jupiter, 400 million miles from the sun, okay? If you were to go out on a clear night, tonight, say, if it stops raining, and you look up, you will see Jupiter. Trust me, very easy to spot. It is the 4th brightest natural object in the sky after the sun and the moon and Venus. The International Space Station is actually the 4th brightest object, but we built that. Jupiter we did not build. It's the 4th brightest natural object. It's incredibly bright. I went out a few weeks ago and took a picture of it in the sky. That is the moon. There was a gorgeous halo around the moon. It's caused by droplets or ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, and you get this beautiful effect. And there's Jupiter. You can see a couple of faint stars there. Jupiter is so bright, I could take a picture of it easily when the moon was sitting right there. I went online. I found another gorgeous picture. Here's the crescent moon. There's Jupiter right there. It's a very bright object. Now, Planet X is supposed to be an object as big or bigger than Jupiter. Now, if Planet X is going to be here by December 21st, 2012, that's in 11 months or so, it's got to hurry. Space, it turns out, is big. That's why we call it space. And it takes our probes a long time to get to these planets. The space probes that we're making are fast, and they take years to get to the planets. So if Planet X is going to be here by 2012, by the end of 2012, it's already going to be very close. Much, 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 much closer than Jupiter is. If it's as big as Jupiter or bigger and closer than Jupiter, I'm thinking it's going to be brighter. It's going to be easy to spot. And so if you were to go out and people say, where is Planet X? And I say, that's a really good question. Why don't I see it? And it's really that simple. And they say, well, it's dark. It's like, well, yeah, you know what? So is Jupiter. It's not generating its own light. It's just reflecting the light from the sun. So is Saturn. So is Venus. So are all the planets. And yet we can see them. If there's an object as big as Jupiter out there that's in our inner solar system, Galileo would have seen it. The Mayans would have seen it. And the fact is there's no record of it. There's nothing out there. So this is the best way to, when people say, what about this Planet X thing? It ain't there. If it were there, we'd see it. So it's just wrong. So planetary alignment, no. Planet X, Oh, what about these solar flares, though? I hear a lot about these solar flares. That's a big deal. Well, the sun is the center of our solar system. It is the source of all the heat, all the light. It's very important to us. Without the sun, we'd be a frozen ball. There wouldn't be anything here. The problem is, besides being the source of all life in the solar system, the sun is also something of a meanie. And yeah, I did that in Photoshop. I'm really good at Photoshop. So what does that mean? Well, the sun, it turns out, has sunspots. These are areas where the sun has a magnetic field. The Earth has a magnetic field. It's like a bar magnet with a north and a south pole. The sun has a magnetic field too. It's far more complicated, but it sort of erupts out in thousands of spots all over the sun. And in some places where the magnetic field is coupled to the sun's surface, you get these things called sunspots. They're slightly cooler regions on the sun's surface, and they're associated with magnetic activity. Well, sometimes the magnetic field lines of the sun get tangled up. Kind of like if you imagine taking a bunch of bed springs and stretching them and holding them out and then throwing them into a pillowcase and holding them there. That's like a sunspot. What happens if you drop that pillowcase? Bam! They all sort of shock each other and release a lot of sound. Magnetic field lines do the same thing. They get tangled up. There's a huge amount of energy that's stored up in there, and they can release it all at once. Boom! As a solar flare. It's a huge explosion of energy. It can be as much as 10% of the sun's output in just a few minutes can occur in a single solar flare. It's a vast amount of energy. These are typically just interesting looking. I can show you pictures of some. Here's a picture of the sun just taken in visible light, and you can see that the surface, you can see some sunspots there. I can zoom in on one of them. These were just from last year. This particular active region had huge sunspots. I superimposed the Earth there to give you an impression of how big these things are. They're huge, and there's vast, vast, vast amounts of energy. This is taken using a telescope. Actually, an amateur astronomer named Alan Friedman took these gorgeous pictures. When you look at these sun and ultraviolet, you can see the energy that comes out of them, and that was during a solar flare from these sunspots. Huge explosion. And these things blast out subatomic particles, which then march across the solar system, and they can interact with our magnetic field. And if you remember your electromagnetism, which I don't very well, but if you look it up, you see that when you change an electromagnetic field, you can induce currents. That's kind of how we make electricity. So if the Earth's magnetic field gets shaken up by these particles, that can induce electricity in the Earth itself. And normally that's not a big deal, but our power grid depends on this sort of thing. And the amount of power flowing through our power grid is at capacity. Our power lines have so much electricity flowing through them that if you add more, it can short them out. And so you can have a solar flare, which interacts with the Earth's magnetic field, which induces a current in the Earth, which induces a current in our power grid, which can then overflow it and blow it out. This happened in 1989 in Quebec. They had a power outage in March. You don't want to be in March in Quebec without electricity. It gets cold. And so this can actually be very dangerous. This can also damage satellites. It hurts our GPS capabilities. And it can do a vast amount of damage. So this is something that astronomers take seriously up to the point where 2012 gets involved. Then you don't have to take it too seriously. Because what happens is the sun has a cycle to these things. And you can measure the number of sunspots that occur over time. And if you do that, you see that there's a cycle to it. And there's an 11-year cycle. The last peak was in, actually there were two peaks, which is kind of typical. There's a sort of a big broad peak that's split into two. The last peak was in roughly the year 2000 and 2002. And that means there were a lot of sunspots, which means there was a lot of solar activity, a lot of solar flares, a lot of these things going on. And you can see that then it died down, and for several years it was at its minimum, and now we're starting to ramp back up. And this is what a lot of the doomsday prophecies guys are saying. In 2012, the sun is going to be hugely flaring, and it's going to be a lot of trouble. And It's like, okay, hang on. Why don't we look at some data? Let's see some evidence. And when you look at the cycle, sure enough, it has been coming back up. Oop, went too far. Thank you. It's been coming back up for a little while. But you'll notice that there's, if you look at where the predicted peak is, given what it's doing, it's actually in 2013. Oops, in spring of 2013. And in fact, this is the earliest I've seen it, the predictions peak. Normally, the peak is going to be later. We had an unusually long minimum. And nobody's really sure why that is, but that typically pushes the peak farther into the future. So I'm thinking 2013, if it's going to be in 2013, it might even be late in the year, if not 2014, that we see the maximum number of sunspots. So in fact, it's not going to happen this year at all. And, I love this part, I keep hitting the wrong button. Oh, thank you, whoever's up there helping me with this. The biggest flares that we saw from the sun were actually in 2003 in November. Huge flares, unprecedented solar activity. And that's interesting, that usually happens after the peak. So not only does this thing peak later than these guys are predicting, but it's probably going to be 2015 or 2016 before we see the really serious activity. And scientists do take this seriously. We're trying to convince the power companies to protect the grid. Satellites are protected for this kind of thing. But as far as 2012 goes, it's not going to happen. So now we've eliminated the planetary alignment, we've eliminated PlanetX, the solar flare is gone, now we're left with my favorite. This is my favorite for a lot of reasons. One is that black holes are cool. It sounds good, a black hole! Kids love black holes. They love the sense of utter destruction. You know, why should I clean my room? We're going to get sucked into a black hole someday. And it sounds good. The sun is going to align with a black hole. That sounds really dangerous. And it turns out, if you have any sense of what I've been talking about for the past few minutes, it's not terribly dangerous. We live in the Milky Way galaxy. This is a huge collection of hundreds of billions, with a B, hundreds of billions of stars, shaped in a flat disk that has a spiral pattern to it, and sort of this central bar region in the middle, and there's the center of the galaxy. The sun in this map is located about halfway out from downtown. We're out in sort of the middle suburbs of the galaxy. This is quite some distance. The galaxy is 100,000 light years across. If I stand on one end and shine a flashlight, it's going to take 100,000 years for that light to go all the way across. And that's moving at 186,000 miles per second. So this is a tremendously fast speed, and it gives you an idea of how huge the galaxy is. And yet, the galaxy is very flat. These are actual observations taken by a satellite orbiting the Earth, and you can see that the galaxy, there's the disk of the galaxy, the central bulge is very flat, and it has sort of an equator to it, going right along the middle. It's very, you can think of that as the galactic mid-plane, and the sun is in that mid-plane about halfway out from the center. That's about where we are, very roughly. You can think of it that way. This is just to give you an idea of where we are. Now, it turns out, what does this have to do with anything? Well, in the center of the galaxy, there is a supermassive black hole. It's not just any black hole. You can get a black hole anywhere. We're talking, this one is supermassive. Every big galaxy has one of these things in the center. 4 million times the mass of the sun. 4 million times the mass. And we're going to align with this thing? Don't panic. The reason you don't have to panic is because this happens all the time. Now you're wondering why I had this. Here's the sun. It's the only yellow thing I had at home. I was looking around a volleyball, but I couldn't fit that in my backpack. So we have a tennis ball representing the sun. I have my squishy Earth ball here. And once a year, the Earth goes around the sun. Earth goes around the sun. Now, from us, we're standing on the Earth. We see the sun moving across the sky because imagine, I'll look over here. If here's the sun as the Earth's going around the sun, one part of the year, if I'm standing on the Earth, I see the sun over in this direction. But a little bit later, as the Earth goes around the sun, now I see the sun over on this part of the sky. And a little bit later, I see the sun over here. So it looks like the sun makes a circle across the sky once a year. And it goes through the zodiac constellations. If you go into the planetarium, and I suggest you do, there's some cool meteorites there. I was looking at them before the convocation this morning. Awesome stuff. if you go down there, you'll see a map of the zodiac constellations in the sky. That's what the sun moves around. Now, so the sun is making a big circle in the sky, but we see the galaxy in the sky as well. And it turns out the path of the sun crosses the galaxy. Where does it do this? It does this actually very near what we think of as the galactic midplane here. I showed you in that diagram earlier. Over the course of the year, the sun moves across, and it is at one point in the year, there we go, it intersects that plane and then moves on, and then later on it keeps going around the sky. Well, where is that spot on the galactic plane? Well, it turns out, by coincidence, I looked this up on a map, it turns out it's very near the galactic center. Here's the path of the sun over the year, called the ecliptic. It's where the zodiac constellations are. This is Sagittarius. You can see part of Scorpius here. There are other constellations. I cut it off. Here's the galactic midplane, the galactic equator. And so where is this intersection? Is it near the black hole? And the answer is, it passes near the black hole. As we're going around the sun, it's close, but it's not that close. And it turns out it does this every year. The center of the galaxy is in the constellation of Sagittarius. So every year in December, the sun passes through the constellation of Sagittarius, and it passes through very close to the center of the galaxy, where that black hole is. Every single year. So yes, will the sun pass by this black hole in 2012? Yes. Yes, it will. Just as it did in 2011 and 2010 and 5000 BC and forever. It turns out that you can map how close it gets to the black hole over time. I'm sorry about the math here. I had to make a plot. But if you actually calculate how close does it get over time, here's the date in December, and this is the distance in degrees, where your thumb is about roughly a degree across on the sky. When the sun is closest to the black hole in the sky is actually December 19th, not the 21st. And so when all these people are saying the sun's going to align with the black hole on the 21st, they're wrong. They're wrong because it's not on the 21st. They're wrong because it's not aligning with the black hole. And they're wrong because it does this every year anyway. And it's not any better. And in fact, the distance the sun passes to this black hole does change over time, very slowly. I shouldn't have said 5000 BC a minute ago, because it does actually move across the sky. It turns out the closest the sun ever got to this black hole was in the year 1998. You may remember December 21st, 1998, once again, as the date the Earth was not destroyed. We're still here. And I like this claim, too. First, it's clearly wrong. It doesn't make any sense, since we do this all the time, and it's not the 21st, and blah, blah, blah. But what does this have to do with anything? And they say, well, the forces of the black hole and the sun will align. And they use words that sound good, but don't really make any sense. If you actually look at what's going to happen, I marked the black hole. There's where the sun is. The problem here is the distances involved. We are about 26,000 light years from the center of the galaxy, where the whole galaxy is 100,000 light years across. We're about halfway out to the edge. That's a long way. What does that mean? What is a light year? How far is 26,000 light years? Turns out it's a lot. That's how many kilometers it is. 260, let's see, 100,000, bazillion. It's 260 bazillion kilometers away. In miles, that's a little bit less. You can multiply that by 0.6 if you want. So the thing is, you can calculate how much gravity that black hole has. Now remember, the black hole has 4 million times the mass of the sun. It's a huge thing. However, the galaxy has 400 billion times the mass of the sun. So the black hole is only, or I should say it this way, the galaxy has 100,000 times the mass of this black hole. You imagine if you were to go to a car dealership and buy a really fancy schmancy sports car for $100,000, and they say, well, it's actually $100,001. That's we have to charge you an extra $1. You're not going to run around screaming, panicking, going, the end of the world. No, it's $1 out of 100,000. That's sort of what's going on here. This black hole is one thing out of 100,000 things in the galaxy. It's ridiculous. And if you calculate the gravitational force of that black hole and compare it to the sun, you see the gravity of the sun is 1.5 trillion times as much. 1.5 trillion, that's huge. In fact, you can look at a dinky planet like Mars, and even the gravity from Mars, which is a little planet, it's smaller than the Earth, and it never gets closer than like 25 or 30 million miles away, has 1,000 times the gravity of this black hole. Yes, the black hole is massive. Yes, black holes are a big deal, but they're really, really far away. They can't hurt us. There's nothing that can align with the sun and this black hole to do anything to us. It's a ridiculous thing to try to claim. And so we know that this black hole has nothing to do with it, and they can claim this all they want. It doesn't matter. So clearly, these are the 4 biggest claims. The planetary alignment, PlanetX, solar flares, the sun aligning with a black hole. Clearly, these are all wrong. And these are just the major things that these people claim. I could go on and on and on. There are so many things that they claim. There's a pole shift. There's a superstorm. I love that. Superstorm. Be a good name for a car. A nearby star is going to blow up, like Betelgeuse. Or there's going to be an asteroid impact. The problem is, there's no evidence there's going to be any kind of pole shift. The Earth's magnetic field fluctuates, but physically flipping the Earth over, that's not really going to happen. There's no evidence that there's going to be some sort of huge global superstorm like there was in the movie Day After Tomorrow. Betelgeuse might blow up in 2012. It might blow up 1,000,000 years from now. So the odds of it blowing up in 2012 are very, very minimal. There's no evidence that it's going to do that. And as far as the big asteroid impact, we have no evidence that there's going to be any kind of asteroid impact this year that's of any import. So what's going on? Why are people claiming this? Who's profiting from this? Well, certainly people who are writing books and making the movies and making History Channel shows about this. Hitler's ghost predicted 2012 would be when Bigfoot would come back or something like that. Certainly, these people are making a profit from it. I'm not happy with that because what they're saying is wrong. There is a group of people who are making a profit from it, and I'm actually kind of happy about it, and that's the people who are doing tours of the Mayan civilization. And there are Mayans around. There are several million descendants of the Mayans. Just because their civilization collapsed around the year 900 AD and over the next few hundred years doesn't mean they're gone. Rome collapsed, there are still Italians. And so they're still around. And so, hello. So actually, tourism is huge this year. That's Chichen Itza. It's a beautiful pyramid. It's called a ziggurat, is the technical term, in the Yucatan Peninsula. It's gorgeous. I was just there last year. And they are doing huge amounts of business. People are taking doomsday tours. Cruise companies are doing doomsday tours, tongue-in-cheek, which is great. Now, of course, the downside of that is you get these pasty white tourists who are showing up at these places. And wrecking it with their horrifying shorts and all of that. But in fact, it was really cool. I really enjoyed going there, and I'd highly recommend it for anyone. So that's good. That's some good news coming out of this. But the problem here is, I love this picture. I found Dean Reeves. I found this online. I thought that's perfect. It really sort of shows what your students are thinking. The thing is, this is all very silly, and you may not have heard about this, but your students have. I will guarantee it. I gave a talk last year where I was talking to some high school students, and they started asking me about 2012, and the teacher came up after me and apologized. And he said, "I'm so sorry they asked you about such a ridiculous topic." And I said, no, you've got that exactly backwards. It's important to them. You should know more about this kind of stuff because they are going to be thinking about it. Believe me, your students know about this. They've heard about it. They've seen the movie. They've read the websites. They have questions about this kind of thing. I actually have not written that much about it because every time I try to write about it, I get so angry because the people writing these books, they are trying to scare people. They really are out there saying all of these ridiculous things, scaring people, and whether it's because they honestly believe this stuff and they really want to warn people, or because they are loathsome, horrifying, terrible con artist human beings who are trying to screw people out of their money by terrifying them. Not that I have any opinion about that. But either way, what they're saying is wrong. And the kids are getting scared. My friend David Morrison, who works for NASA, who writes Ask an Astrobiologist website, is getting questions about this constantly. He hears terrible stories of people who are terrified, people contemplating suicide because of this, because they don't want to see what's going to happen this year. Your students are going to be worried about it. You need to be armed about this. You can find information about this online. You can get the real astronomy of it and find out what's going on. And I just want to show you the basic stuff about this because really these things are very easy to show wrong, but very hard to find that information in many cases. And so your students grew up with the internet. And so they may not understand that there's stuff on the internet. And this seems so silly, but they may not understand that there are websites out there made up by people who are just making stuff up. It has nothing to do with reality. And you need to be able to show them that. So the real thing here is, what's left? What's possibly left after 2012? All of these claims, what's going to happen, after December 21st? I get this all the time. What's going to happen after December 21st, 2012? And I said, well, 2013 is going to happen after December 21st, 2012, and 2014 and 2015 and the rest of eternity. We have plenty of time left, folks. If doomsday comes, it's not going to be because of any of this stuff. It's going to be something else, and it's going to be a long, long time in the future, and hopefully by then we'll be able to do something about it, like an asteroid impact or something like that. But when it comes to this sort of stuff, ain't going to happen. I'm looking forward very much to December 22nd, 2013, when I can wake up and not have to deal with this and start thinking about whatever nonsense is next down the road. Thank you very much.